Welcome back to the History Bards podcast. I'm host Dee Marley, and we are glad you are joining us today. We have the great privilege of featuring historical fiction author Janet Wertman, and as a way of introduction, Janet Ambrosi Wertman grew up within walking distance of 3 bookstores and a library on Manhattan's Upper West Side. And her grandfather was an antiquarian bookseller who taught her that there would always be a market for quirky, interesting books. I love that. Janet spent 15 years as a corporate lawyer in New York as well as a grant writer, but Janet's passion for the history of the Tudor kings and queens sent her deep into writing her next trilogy about the era, which everybody knows I'm a huge Tudor fan, so we are glad to have you on the show today.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, because I am such a Tudor fan, and since in your bio you talk about your early days of loving Tudor history, can you tell us more about that to get started?
Oh my goodness, I was 8 years old. It was Masterpiece Theater's Six Wives of Henry VIII.
Yes.
And it was on, there were beheadings, so it was on late. And my parents let me stay up late to watch it.
Yeah.
And that was it. Keith Mitchell in that series, and then Glenda Jackson in Elizabeth.
Yes.
And I was hooked ever
Oh,
since then.
yes. Yes, I totally understand. I think I started reading, of course, I think a lot of us historical fiction authors started off reading Victoria Holt, but I remember reading a lot, but then her Philippa Carr books, and somewhere in there was like her Tudor history books. And I just remember that as a youngster too. So I'm right with you on that.
Right. That's right. She wrote her Tudor books as Jean Plaidy.
Yes, Jean Plaidy, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Yeah, absolutely.
No,
So can you tell us a little bit more about your own books, the series, and the premise behind them?
yes. So far, I've written 3 books, a trilogy, the Seymour Saga. It is the story of Jane the Queen, which is the name of the first one. Her brother Edward's rise to power after Jane died, and during like Henry's crazy years, and then the story of her son. And it is, I originally wanted to write about Anne Boleyn, as I
Okay.
think a lot of people
A lot.
do.
Right.
Hear that story. Like, I want to write that. And I had this wonderful idea for a book. It was a dual timeline, way before dual timelines became popular. It was called The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn. And it would be Anne's, obviously, secret diary, and Elizabeth reading it later. And I actually wrote about 150 pages of it. And then all of a sudden, another first-time author published her debut novel, The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn. And my book, my title, even my cover premise, exactly the same. It was like, how did Robin Maxwell get my computer files? But the decision to switch over to Jane's story, I actually appreciated that, because Anne's story is best known. You need to find out what happened after to really understand Anne's story, and Jane provided the perfect opportunity to tell that.
Yes.
I slithered around a little bit, and it was only when I realized that it wasn't only Jane's story, that all of the Seymours were really central to the era, that I was able to just, okay, now that I conceptualized it, I was able to do the full arc and the full 3 books.
Oh,
So.
that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing how that happens, and I think it's because there is such an interest about Anne Boleyn that, it's because books are constantly, so don't give it up. Even if it's, the same title, it's in your voice, and that's what would be
Exactly.
special. Yeah, exactly. So, I know you kind of told us a little bit about what your particular interest was in this era because of your childhood and watching those shows and everything. So can you tell us a little bit more about, have you ever traveled to the areas to do research or?
Oh, absolutely. And just walking through and seeing, and I mean, it's the kind of travel that almost surprises you. like going to Westminster Abbey and
Yes.
suddenly seeing, jumping over, and it's like, oh my goodness, the tomb of Anne Seymour Somerset. I mean,
Yeah.
you just like being surprised by the things that you find there. The Essex ring. When I went upstairs and they had the ring, there was a legend that Elizabeth had given Essex a ring and said, if you're ever in trouble, give them this or give me this. And he sent her the ring, and nobody actually delivered it, but that's the ring that was the story of the legend. Whether or not you believe the legend, the best part of going, though, I went to Sudeley Castle several times, once on a dig, looking for an
Oh,
Elizabethan garden. But that's where I found the cover of my second book, because Edward Seymour, people hate him. They really do. They don't see the tortured soul that he was. And the two portraits that are best known of him, one really fits the whole dour, dry description that we get from one of the ambassadors, and the other is the kindly older man. And neither of those really reflected the Edward Seymour, the face that I had.
right.
And I was walking around the corner in Sudeley Castle, and there was a portrait over the fireplace, and that was my Edward. And
Oh,
they allowed me to use the portrait for my
oh,
second book.
that's
That's
wonderful. That's wonderful. When we went, and I remember walking through um the chapel there at Windsor Castle and just walking up on Henry VIII and Jane Seymour's, you know, right there, you're looking down, and it just this feeling of the history that's there. So I completely understand what you're saying. It's like a surprise. You're like, oh,
right here. It's like,
yeah.
oh, well, let me introduce myself.
Yes, absolutely. It's really amazing. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the research that you did, and maybe if there was anything obscure you found in your research?
Oh my goodness. So much research. There are so many levels of research, like the
Yes.
overall, just looking for the dates and then looking through letters and papers. What castle were they in on this day, and all of that. And then there are the little things like, what was the quote above that particular fireplace?
Oh,
You know,
yes.
you find yourself doing that. Um, the things I really love are um, the parallels and like the little surprising things. So here's an example of what I mean
Okay.
by parallel. Um, so we all know about the sinking of the Mary Rose.
Mhm.
We have, and now we have the museum because they brought up the Mary Rose.
Right.
That was the whole during the battle between England and France. Mary Rose sang. What we don't know as much is that 2 days before that, the French flagship sank. And nobody ever gets that story. And that is a fantastic story. So
Yeah.
Francis, right before he sent his ships to go attack England in what would scuttle the Mary Rose, went on to his main flagship to have dinner. The problem is that he didn't want to eat the standard sailor's fare, so he brought his chefs with him. His
Mhm.
chefs were not used to cooking on ships, and they had no idea that the way the ship was constructed, the kitchens were right next to the gunpowder.
Oh,
And
no.
chefs were not anywhere near as careful as a ship's
Oh.
cook would be. All of a sudden, there was like screaming and, get out. And they had to get him, they barely got him off
Oh.
the ship. He was there with his family. They barely got everybody off before the ship just exploded and sank. So that is this fantastic story of,
Oh, wow.
a little bit of, I actually used it in my second book because
Mhm.
of the whole concept of feeling a little bit smug, like, yeah, you just lost your flagship. And then, and then, Henry finding out that he just lost his. So it's like, well,
Right.
where's God's judgment in that? So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I love. That's my favorite part of the research
Yes, it
is,
is. It's like whenever you can find those little gems like that that nobody had never heard of before. And that really fleshes your book out, doesn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, it does. Well, we would love for you to, well, before I ask that, because I would love to know a little bit more about, like maybe you could share your favorite passage or favorite, quote or something from your book. We would love to hear it.
Oh, that is so sweet. I actually thought, because I love this interview series, and I
Uh-huh.
know that you've done with some people, and I went to look for one, and I did have one, but it's like 400 words, and
Oh,
I would just be sitting here and chattering on for
uh-huh.
too long. And instead, I want to bring to light, I think, a line that I wrote like 10 years ago, and
Okay.
I am never going to be able to use it, but
Oh,
it is the best line I have ever written. And so this is my opportunity to talk
okay.
about it. It was the one time all our friends have been going, oh, you should try a cruise. You should try a cruise. You should try a cruise. We went on a cruise and we did it wrong and we hated it. And my line, we hated the cruise. Our cabin was deep in the bowels of the ship, the nautical equivalent of nosebleed seats. I love that. And there is no way that in any of my
Oh,
historical I am ever going to be able to use that. But that was my line. And
yeah,
it's just really sad when you get one of those and you can't use it. And no
yeah.
matter how I try to shoehorn it, and I can shoehorn a lot of things.
Yeah, I was fixing to say, I bet you've tried. I bet you've tried to use it.
And it's like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
Nosebleed seats is just too much
No, that's too
of the people.
modern. Yeah. So let me ask you this. What did you find that was most difficult about writing this series of books?
The most Each book presented its own challenges.
Hmm.
So Jane the Queen presented the challenge of giving a portrait of Jane and giving realistic stuff before we knew much of where she was at any particular time.
Hmm.
Um, book two was poor Edward, people hate him. Just trying to explain how no, this wasn't his fault. And then book three, I had a young boy who was being manipulated, and the story was being told through his eyes. So the real challenge was allowing the reader to see immediately that he was being manipulated, even though he had no idea. He was the one explaining that to the reader, but he had no idea that this was going on. And so I had a bunch of critique groups and then beta readers all going, oh no, we got that. Yeah, John Dudley, Northumberland, no, he manipulated. He got that. So, but that was a challenge to really
Okay.
figure out the line to walk.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, so I know a lot of our readers and fans out there listening are like huge fans of the Wolf Hall series. So
Yeah.
how is your book like in relation to the Wolf Hall series? How is that like fit into it? Because I know we have a lot of fans of that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Cromwell is one of the voices in my books,
Okay,
in Jane,
great.
because you really can't tell Jane Seymour's story just from her side.
Right.
Um, because my Jane Seymour saw Henry as all good, and
Mhm.
Thomas Cromwell saw him as all evil.
Yeah.
So in between, I don't give Henry a voice. I just give Jane and Cromwell voices.
Oh,
So
wow.
you can make your own determination as to
Yeah.
what you believe about Henry in all of that. The Wolf Hall obviously focused on Cromwell. My Jane is very different. I didn't like
Okay.
Hilary Mantel's Jane.
Uh-huh.
I just didn't. My Jane is has much more agency,
Okay.
and is smarter. My Cromwell is also a good guy, as
Oh,
opposed to he does believe in the righteousness of what it
mm-hmm.
is. It was a little bit, and I also don't do Hilary Mantel's weird, close third, he, Cromwell, that was,
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
don't do any of that, but it was a little bit, had it not been for the fact that my Jane was so different, it would have made me a little bit nervous to come out that close to
Right,
Wolf Hall,
right. Well,
that
that's
kind of
really good to know because, like I said, there's a lot of people who really love those books. So to know the differences and the similarities for the fans out there, thank you for that. So we would love to know more about, we always want to hear about an author's journey as a writer. And what kind of advice would you give yourself as a young writer that might help an aspiring historical author today?
keep your butt in the chair. Um, so I'm going to circle back to something that I alluded to before, which was it was hard for me to get Jane's story done
Right.
until I realized that it was part of a larger trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, so in karate, my kids did karate, so I did karate to kind of keep them company. When you want to break a board, which you need to do to graduate to new belts, they teach you that you can't aim at the board. You have to aim beyond the board.
Oh, wow.
So paradoxically, a lot of people have a problem. They want to write a book and they set that goal of writing the book, and it seems too much, and they're having trouble with that. And I'm going to say that instead of trying to lower your goal and, well, let's just try to take it a little bit at a time, it's like, yes, make that a strategy, but push your goal even further out and make it an even bigger goal with just smaller steps towards it. And so, but add in that, go for it, and try to go even further than you thought you could.
I think that's an excellent, excellent advice. Because it does push yourself. What you need to do as a historical fiction author, or as any author, you need to push yourself beyond what you think that you can do. So that's excellent advice. Is there anything in your writing journey that you read yourself that really impacted you?
My favorite book of all time also happens to be in this era, but all the way on the other side of the world, was James Clavell's Shogun,
Oh, yes.
which was amazing.
Yes,
The way
I
he
agree.
developed all of those characters, the way he gave us the descriptions, and always putting them in the context of um, the natural thing. We got the brilliance of having an English pilot navigating in between his Japanese hosts and the Portuguese, and just everybody getting just the way everything shifted little by little as understanding came. I've never seen it done better than that.
Yeah.
I think that is its own masterclass
Oh,
in how to write.
yes. I absolutely agree. And I'm sure that that had a way of influencing your own writing.
Oh, completely. It's so here's one example of one of the beautiful descriptions that he did was he was at some sort of I don't know, he was explaining relaxing with three Japanese women, and they had been drinking a little bit, and they were asking him about his life at home, and tell us about your wife. And he just said something like, well, her hair is, and he pointed at one of like the wooden posts. He's like, her hair is the color of that, and you watch them all look to the post and look back to him, and it's like that's the way of doing it, is to bring it to the immediate. It was
Yes.
perfectly done.
Yeah, I agree. And that goes into really showing something instead of telling. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely
Yeah.
it does. Well, we would love to know more about what you have coming up. Do you have any events or any books coming up?
I have events, I have books. Yes, I do. Event that's coming up is TutorCon. I've been
Oh,
speaking there. That's an annual thing. You've heard of Comic-Con? There's
yes.
TutorCon.
Yes. So when is that and where is it?
It is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it coincides with the Renaissance Fair in Lancaster, so it's kind of on the grounds. And it is 3 days of just speakers and people getting dressed up, and it's a wild time that kind of culminates with the Ren Fair.
And when is that?
That is September 8th through 11th, or 8th through 10th.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're going to be there. Are you going to be signing books?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So anybody out in that area during that time, be sure to go over and get a signed book from Janet for that weekend. We really, really appreciate you being on the show today, Janet. Thank you so much.
I am thrilled, and I'm going to make you have me back when I publish my next trilogy.
Oh,
which is
you better believe it. You just send me an email, and we'll get you in on another interview and be able to launch your next book.
Oh, wonderful.
We are looking so forward to your upcoming books, and we really are excited about your series. And for all the fans listening in, you can learn more about Janet and her books at www.janetwertman.com. And as always, we thank everyone for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Next week, we are taking a small break, but we'll be back the first week in September with another episode featuring another amazing historical author. This is DK Marley with the History Bards podcast. Keep making history and keep listening.